Thank you for joining us today for how sophisticated marketers think about programmatic and measurement maturity. We are excited to have you join us along with our friends at MightyHive. I'm one of your hosts, Doug Weiner, working in tandem with Stephen Cavell, and we are your customer success managers. We support all products in the Google marketing platform, and we're here to help answer your questions and get the most out of your products and initiatives. We put this workshop together to help bring you industry-relevant content. We want to provide strategy, thought leadership, some tactics, all things on helping you get more out of the tools you use today. We'll be covering some thought leadership today, and our friends at MightyHive are going to provide an excellent presentation. We'll also have the opportunity to have Q&A, so if this is your first workshop, please don't hesitate to pose any questions to the chat or the Q&A box. I'll also be posting a couple of polls. I'd love to hear your responses in terms of how you're using the products and what you're talking about inside your organizations today, so please keep an eye out for that as well. I'm also excited to share that Stephen and I are working on our next multi-part series, The Path to Digital Marketing Maturity, where we'll have sections covering audience, analysis, assets, automation, and organization. More details to come. If there's any other topics you'd like to see us cover, please shoot us a note, or if you have any feedback regarding this workshop or any of our other ones, email us at csm_workshops@google.com. If you haven't had the opportunity to take the digital maturity benchmark from our partnership here with BCG, we'll go ahead and provide this deck after the session, and you'll include a link to that where you'll be able to go ahead and provide a bunch of answers and generate a score for your organization that you can use to guide you and help you move along the digital maturity curve. Again, myself and Stephen and our friends at MightyHive are here to help and answer any questions. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce the amazing Chris Brook and the amazing Adam Renson from MightyHive. Over to you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks everybody for coming today. Just a quick round of introductions from the MightyHive side before we jump into the content here. My name is Chris Brook. I'm a director of client solutions here at MightyHive. My role kind of encompasses a number of different facets of the MightyHive business, inclusive of sales, operations, account management, among other things. I've been at MightyHive for about 4 years now. Started in our account management organization out in our San Francisco office, and then recently moved out to New York City as of February 2017. A bit of a homecoming for me to open up our New York City office.
And I'm Adam Renson. I'm Director of Content Marketing at MightyHive. I'm really just here to help tell the stories. I come from a background of B2B marketing as well as B2C, working at Adweek magazine and NBC in the past, but really I've been here only for about 3 months now, but I'm a New York native, so I know my way around town. Take it back to you, Chris.
Awesome. So today we're going to give you just a brief overview about MightyHive, talk about the industry and how it's evolved, and try and thread some themes throughout the presentation that I think a lot of you will relate to. Then we're going to get into some focuses on first-party data, so how sophisticated marketers are thinking about first-party data and then activating it across their programmatic deal types, their high-impact formats, and creative formats, and then ultimately getting into some case studies that really showcase what sophisticated marketers are doing to enable their first-party data across a litany of different ecosystems. But to start, I'll give you a little brief overview about MightyHive. At its core, MightyHive helps marketers take control of their digital media. We started out as a data company about 7 years ago, where we were building products that essentially allowed marketers to take control of their first-party data. So we were building call center remarketing products, email list remarketing products, but what we found was that the industry was really not ready for this idea of first-party data activation. And so we first started by getting into the programmatic services realm. And our business is focused really around 3 things: consulting, platform implementation, and media activation. We really built our business by putting our clients in the driver's seat with platform logins and full access to data from day one. And ultimately, all of what we do is focused around solving business objectives. So we don't just focus on media outcomes, but really what's going to drive the needle for your business and ultimately lead to success for you. And I'll kick it over to Adam just to set some themes for the day.
Yeah, as we were thinking about today's presentation and putting a framework around it, Chris and I kept coming back to the same analogy over and over again, which was about cars. I think that if you think about how cars have evolved and the sophistication of cars, it all happens in cycles. And in the beginning of the first car was called the horseless carriage, which is an interesting term because it's a term that says what it is not. It says that there's no more horse. So people just said, okay, I'm going to keep on delivering my milk and doing the same things I always did when I had a horse with this new device. But as it evolved, it hasn't changed very much in terms of just its basic function. It's still a horseless carriage. It's a lot more comfortable and faster and more powerful, but ultimately it does the same thing. But now we do cross-country journeys and we go car camping and there's all these other things that we've done. And so in the stage that we're in right now is the most advanced and the most actualized version of what a car can be. But we're just on the verge of entering the self-driving car, which again defines it as to what it is not. We won't be driving it anymore. But how this impacts us, it's going to be yet to be seen. Whether this gets rid of parking lots altogether or whether children are going to be riding around in cars without any adults, or who knows how this is all going to work. But the point is that we're ready for it and we're ready to embrace this new technology right now. So looking at it as a way that it applies through digital advertising, let's look at it through the BCG maturity framework, which I, again, encourage you all to check out. First, the way that they look at things is through nascent, emerging, connected, and then multi-moment. And the first one, nascent, is really, if you're not a sophisticated marketer, if you're really at the beginning stages of your digital advertising, you're using banner ads. And these are ads that are placed manually and contextually, very similar to how ads have always been placed, just in a digital world. Emerging is where we start to get into cookies and programmatic, and this is early stage targeting and retargeting. But this gave birth to problems, consumer fatigue and privacy concerns came as a result of this all getting used to a great, great degree. What's emerging now and through the sort of connected world is that there's going to be much more use of logins, as companies like Google are doing such a good job of creating an ecosystem that everybody can market within. Omni-channel and cross-channel are going to be gigantic, and these are all going to, and already are gigantic, and they're all generating thousands of data signals across multiple devices and connected channels. The big thing that we're looking for here in terms of the future, and where really the sophisticated marketer is getting prepared for, is this AI fully automated, what we're calling the shining city on the hill. And this is where the first-party data engine is continually fine-tuning itself through re-inputting new data and further refining the customer and who that person is. And it's based on millions of data signals coming from so many different places, not just in the advertising ecosystem, but all over the place, all the data that's coming from all of your customers and through CRM and retail and so on and so forth. So it's really, if there's a big takeaway here, it's that first-party data is everything. It's the way that sophisticated marketers are preparing for the future and using it to their best of ability right now. The best marketers today have two strategies. They have a digital marketing strategy, but they also have a first-party data strategy. That's what's fueling, they want their first-party data to get constantly better and better in order to fuel their digital marketing strategy. And as we say here, it's not just a tool in the toolkit, it is the toolkit. So I'm going to hand it back to Chris right now, sticking with this sort of car theme of now, early now and future, but now nascent, emerging, and connected multi-moment. We're going to have Chris walk us through how this looks in a first-party data environment.
Great. Thanks, Adam. And to really set the stage here, it's important to understand, where we were, where we are, and where we were going. And when I think about the history of first-party data, I don't think that there's ever been a shortage of it. You had companies that were really, really good at defining direct mail strategies. You had call centers that, knew exactly who you were, where you lived, what your buying behavior was. The problem was that many of these companies didn't necessarily have the technology to activate it. They had the people who could, do manual analysis of who their customers were and what they wanted. But a lot of what they were doing was assumption-based. And that, kind of trickled down to the way in which they were developing their advertising strategies. Today, we have a ton of different data on our audiences that lies with not just within your ad tech ecosystem, but your broader MarTech ecosystem as well. And we have tons of different contextual and behavioral strategies that are really, really driving our digital marketing transformations. But in order to become a sophisticated marketer, it's really not about how much data we have, but more so how we activate it. And I say that because activation needs to happen in real time. And so it's not just, collecting information about an assumed customer or an assumed audience, but making those decisions on a real-time matrix decision tree where you're targeting people across channels and making a decision on millions of different data points, not just from your media, but from your marketing ecosystems as well. But in order to understand that, I think, it really, really is helpful to understand the different types of data sources. And this should not come as a surprise to anybody in this room, but, I find that it's important to cover nonetheless. Everyone understands first-party, second-party, and third-party data, but the application of those three things to what sophisticated marketers are doing today is really, really important for understanding what an advanced digital strategy looks like. You had in the past, you had third-party data, which was, an assumed audience that, you would expect an outcome from, but it wasn't necessarily tied directly to, directly tied to business results. It was tied to media, right? We were measuring things like CPC, CTR, CPA. Google did a really, really good job, and, there's a couple other companies as well, of introducing second-party data wherein you're getting not just purchase behavior and behavioral signals, but also, search query data, right? Figuring out what people are looking for online so that you can define where in their consumer journey they are. And then everybody knows that first-party data is like gold. You should cherish it. You should keep it under wraps. And, we'll talk about privacy regulations in a little bit. But it's really important to understand that in order to become a sophisticated marketer, focusing on how your first-party data drives business outcomes and not just media outcomes, like third-party data and second-party data were designed to do, is critically important. So I'll give you a quick example of what a sophisticated marketer is doing today. And by no means do I expect everybody to have this mathematical equation down by the end of today. But a sophisticated marketer that we work with is really focused on driving business outcomes. And in this instance, we're measuring not things like CPA, CTR, and CPC, rather expected lifetime value. So defining where that person is in their consumer journey and then placing a metric against them that says exactly what their expected value is to my company is really, really powerful, and quite frankly is going to be a much better indicator for business success than something like a cost per acquisition online, because that's only a directional indicator of how your audiences are performing or how your customers are interacting with your brand. So focusing on that business objective, focusing on something that is tangible, that I can go out and say, this person is worth X or this audience is worth Y, and then treat those people differently based on where they are in the consumer journey is fundamentally important. And as a result of that, it allows you to start activating those strategies across your ad tech ecosystem. So doing a predictive lifetime value model is something that will allow you to do things like lookalike modeling in DV360, finding out who your most important customers are and how valuable they are to you, and then building a lookalike model to find net new customers that look like that person. Bidding up or down on specific audience groups depending on the lifetime value to your brand, focusing on the consumer journey and how site behavior is broken down by customer segment, and then ultimately just making your media more efficient in the way that you are, bidding, measuring, and then activating across all of your digital media channels. So what can you be doing to start to think about how I move from today to tomorrow? I think the crux of it is the integration of not just your media data in one single source, but also your brand data as well. And starting to draw connections and build pipelines that, provide a directional indication of the effect of my display campaigns or the effect of my search campaigns or YouTube campaigns on something like a survey result, right? How is somebody interacting with my brand as a result of seeing an ad on the NewYorkTimes.com or, within, a programmatic ecosystem? How can I do directional analysis on, the costs and the flights that I have within my advertising strategies and ultimately the outcomes of the audience that I'm trying to go after? So the way that this can be done, and an easy step one for marketers is to set up a BigQuery instance. Start porting all of the data that you have into a BigQuery project so that you're able to eventually do the analysis. Start now, do the analysis later, but set the foundation so that you're setting yourself up for success so that you can become a sophisticated marketer when it comes to the measurement and activation of your first-party data. And I think, it would be amiss to not talk about the current world that we live in. We live in a very, very highly privacy-regulated ecosystem. And it just further exacerbates the need for first-party data. Previously, you could rely on third parties to provide a link or to provide a cookie that would essentially allow you to measure the effectiveness of your media campaigns on the outcomes of your audiences. That's going to go away soon with the integrations of GDPR, the California Privacy Act, among the inevitable other privacy regulations that are coming down the pipeline. But that can be solved for by integrating things like analytics platforms, which is technically a first-party data platform, incorporating things like logins on your website so that you can start to build your own device graph so that when the customer comes to your site, you can know exactly who they are, exactly where they came from, and exactly what behaviors they're displaying on your site so that you can start to build a full picture of that customer and talk to them in ways that you haven't before. I'll stop there for a second. Are there any questions that we want to answer before we move into programmatic deal types? Or Doug, are there any surveys that you want to throw up there?
Chris, first survey just wrapped up. I'll go ahead and share the poll results with the group. I've got at least one or two more polls that I'm going to go ahead and put out there, but keep rolling. And thanks for the participation,
Great.
folks.
So we'll continue with this theme of nascent, emerging / connected and multi-moment and the application of first-party data on programmatic deal types. And the evolution of programmatic deal types and kind of how that impacts marketer strategies and how we're activating our audiences across the different ecosystems that we're buying on. The old way of doing things, the nascent, if you will, was using content as a proxy for where our audiences might have been. Let's say I'm in market for a new car, right? I might buy the auto section on the New York Times, or I might set up a direct deal with Kelley Blue Book, or any of the other relevant sites that I'm using just as a proxy for or an assumption about where my audience might live. Today, the programmatic ecosystem has made it a little bit more complex in the sense that we are adding an ability to buy those sources programmatically. The side effects of doing so make it relatively complicated to understand your working media. There's fraud within the exchange and SSP realm. There's very little transparency. And it came with the supposed simplicity of working with a single DSP or a single SSP or a single exchange. But what it did solve for was having us not have to call a million different people to set up deals across 5, 10, 20, 100 different publishers. So there was a purpose to it. It kind of works, but there are flaws and doesn't really fit the mold for what sophisticated marketers are doing or should be doing within a programmatic landscape. So the future for programmatic deal types is really utilizing first-party data across the different ecosystems and across the different publishers that you're buying on. So understanding if there's audience overlap between my direct buys or my direct publisher buys or my programmatic guaranteed buys, and really utilizing those things to define what my media effectiveness is. Can I bring my own data to the party? Can I utilize things like suppression audiences, people who have already converted, to really, really drive home the effectiveness of my media and prove the value of every single working dollar that I have? Just a quick overview of the inventory matrix. As I mentioned, this was created just out of necessity, a need to buy this inventory programmatically. But to give a very, very quick overview, your open auction, everybody has access to, is known as, I guess you could call it remnant inventory. And that inventory gets placed into an open auction, which all advertisers have access to. A private auction is a specific deal that is set up by a publisher that allows you to start at a CPM floor and then bid up based on the value of that inventory to you. Preferred deals is a one-to-one relationship between buyer and the publisher. It's a predetermined CPM, and you can buy as many impressions as they have available. But again, in the realm of the programmatic waterfall, this is superseded by the programmatic guaranteed deal, which is a one-to-one relationship between your buyer and your publisher for a set dollar amount and based on a fixed impression count. So what are sophisticated marketers doing in order to really, really hone in on working media effectiveness? I'll use a quick case study to kind of highlight how that works. MightyHive worked with a hotel brand out in Las Vegas. For privacy reasons, we unfortunately can't share who that is. But they were buying a number of different publisher inventories across probably 30 or 40 different ecosystems, inclusive of SSPs, exchanges, networks, direct buys, et cetera, which is really hindering their ability to see the effectiveness of every single dollar that they were spending. Not to mention there was a severe operational efficiency from having to reach out to a number of different people in order to get their media live. So we worked in partnership with Google to really, really help them understand where they were not being as effective as they could be with their media. Where was their audience overlap between the 30 different sources that they had? Were they able to incorporate a thing like a universal frequency cap across all of the different sources that they were buying on, inclusive of the publishers, inclusive of the networks, et cetera? And so we consolidated all of those inventory sources within DV360 and started to bring our own data to the party. We included things like a suppression audience to ensure that anybody who had booked a hotel with us in the last 60 days wasn't targeted. Because they may be on those websites, but ultimately those aren't the people that we're wanting to go after, because if we were to show them an ad after they'd already converted, it's a terrible user experience. So as we think about sophisticated marketers, and the application of first-party data to programmatic deal types, it's how can I be as effective as possible with every single dollar that I have so that I'm going after the right audience and hitting them at the right moment, in the right place, at the right time. And we'll finish on creative personalization. I think there's a very common theme here, as you've probably noticed with the rest of the presentation, wherein the nascent version of creative personalization was broadcast. It was one-to-many. You were taking out an ad spot in a newspaper, or taking out an ad spot in a magazine, and really making assumptions about who your customers were and what they wanted to hear. Today, we've got the cross-channel ability to target people based on signals and first-party data that we're collecting from our site, and start to focus on the things that really, really matter to them and get more effective with the way that we're buying our media. But the future of creative personalization is not broadcast. It's not one-to-many. I would say it's not one-to-one. It's actually many-to-one, where you're taking not tens, not hundreds, not thousands, but millions of different data points about your consumer, not just from ad tech, but from your MarTech ecosystem as well, to drive home this idea of dynamic creative, not just in programmatic, but dynamic creative across the ecosystem, across, out of home, across TV. And I would say that, we're a ways away from being able to truly do linear, addressable, one-to-one dynamic creative across the different formats that we're using. But in anticipation of that, it's really critical to set the foundation for how people are thinking about their creative strategies and how we're collecting data about our customers, so that when the time comes, the technology is enabling us to be able to, focus on those cross-screen activations, we're ready for it. And we can start to think about what it is that's going to resonate with that customer at their stage in the consumer journey. So as the ecosystem has evolved and we've gone from banners to retargeting to dynamic creative, and with the promise of omni-channel DCO, there's one thing that I wanted to call out in terms of what the definition of a high-impact format is. And I think that a lot of people have this misunderstanding that a high-impact format is quite literally just a unique size on a website. It's a page takeover, or it's a 970 by 250. But we would argue that a high-impact format isn't just a definition for what a creative looks like. Rather, it's subjective to the individual that's consuming it. And I say that because me at 11 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon is far different than me on a Sunday afternoon. And utilizing first-party data to drive that message so that whatever brand is trying to talk to me in the right moment at the right time is really, really critical. And I would argue that I'm far more likely to react well to a personalized 300 by 250 than I am to react to a homepage takeover on ESPN.com. And I'll say that those definitely do serve a purpose, but in the realm of personalization and in the realm of thinking about utilizing matrix decisioning and millions of different data points to talk to your consumers, the industry as a whole really, really needs to change so that we're able to activate our first-party data in a way that's going to resonate with our consumers. And so what were some of the problems that were created as a result of the legacy creative practice? It was expensive, right? You would have to create thousands of different versions, thousands of different sizes just to get your message across. So there's tremendous cost from a production perspective, but also from an operational inefficiency perspective, right? You're having to create different sizes and different versions and then go out and build different line items to target different people and different audience groups. And that really, really caused a barrier to being effective in the way that you're talking to those consumers. It was also slow to market. To go back to my point about me being different today than I am going to be on the weekend is really, really critically important, because when I collect a data point about a consumer, I need to be able to act on that in real time. If I'm relying on a third party to give me information about who my consumer is and what they're doing and the actions that they've taken on my site, you've lost the chance to talk to that consumer in a way that's going to be relevant to them. And last but not least, it's static and unadaptive. There's no versioning and iteration. Everybody's seeing the exact same thing. I go to a website and look at a pair of black Nikes. I'm going to get a picture of those black Nikes, maybe with 10% off. There's a reason that I left that site, and oftentimes the norm or kind of what we've adapted to today and the processes that we've built around just standard dynamic retargeting is not enough to help us become sophisticated marketers in the future. So what can you do? If you're stuck in this world of building thousands of different formats and really, really focusing on audiences as a whole rather than individual consumers, you can start by thinking about just a general dynamic creative strategy. So what information are you collecting about that consumer on your site? How is that information stored in an ad server? And can I set up a dynamic feed that allows me to create individual rows that essentially act as a persona for the person that I'm trying to hit? So to use the example of being in market for a new Toyota Corolla, for example, right? I might go to Toyota.com, choose a specific make, model, trim of that car. And ultimately, if Toyota is smart, they're collecting all of that information and putting that into a dynamic feed so that not only are they targeting me with that message, but they're able to recognize the actions that I took on their site so that they're able to be more pointed in the way that they're talking to me across different formats. If that's too advanced, I think Google has a really, really awesome first step in a native DCO integration that allows you to create a bunch of different high-impact creatives that are directly connected to DV360. A step ahead of that is Google Studio, and those things integrate really, really nicely with the rest of the stack. You're actually able to measure the effectiveness of your media based on the individual creative element. So whether that's your CTA, whether that's the color of your background, whether that's the photo that you used, Google Studio ultimately allows you to collect information about every single aspect, not just of your consumer, but the way that they interacted with that ad as well. And to give you an example of a more sophisticated activation that we've done, this was actually done by our sister company, Media Monks, where they built a dynamic video campaign based on a number of different behavioral and contextual signals for the Narcos Season 3 release. There were 3 different target audiences that they were going to based on local interests, and based on the behavioral signals, where they were in the digital world, which screens they were on, the consumer journey that they took on the Narcos website, environmental signals, what the weather was like, where they were in the physical world, and then the audience signals, who those people were. We were actually able to figure out a way and devise a way in which the creative itself would change based on all of those signals. And ultimately, it had a really, really big impact to the media format, or sorry, the media KPIs that we were trying to achieve. We saw a 6% lift in interaction, a 60% lift in CTR, an average display time of 2 additional seconds, and an average interaction time of 6 seconds. To use another example, Google did a really great case study, and if you go into their case study library, I actually recommend everybody to do this. There was a case study that was done with Scandinavian Airlines where they essentially started collecting attributes about customers off their site and putting those attributes into a dynamic feed so that they were able to target people not just on whether or not they came to their website, but start to think about who those people were in terms of the fare class that they were buying, right? Somebody who's buying a basic economy ticket is far different than somebody who's buying a premium economy or business or first class ticket. So they were able to get to a point where they weren't using hundreds but millions, I think it was something like 1.1 million different data sources and different data variations in order to talk to their customers in a way that was going to be relevant to them depending on where they were in their consumer journey. And now what can you be doing to set yourself up for success in the future and really, really focus on the collection of those data points to drive an omni-channel, multi-moment, multi-data source, dynamic creative strategy. It starts with building a foundation, figuring out where in your marketing and advertising technology stacks you guys have data that can ultimately inform creative variation. Develop creative template library and start to collect those assets so that when you do decide that you guys are ready for dynamic creative, you have those ready and you're not kind of searching amongst different departments to try and find the relevant formats or logos or ads or photos that you need to create those creatives. The second is personalization, right? Incorporate not just your online analytics data, not just your media data, but your CRM data, your point of sale data, your offline data that you're collecting about your customers, and have those all live within a single source of truth, like Google Cloud, which is Cloud for Marketing, so that you're able to create new variants at a moment's notice without requiring additional production resources and really, really drive home this idea of operational efficiencies. And then finally, I think the real value proposition of dynamic creative, in addition to the operational efficiencies that it provides, is that you're able to test and iterate in real time, and that you can run not one test on creatives every quarter, not one test on creatives every month, but if constructed correctly, you can start running creatives by every minute, by every variation, by every element that's within your creative, so that you're able to uncover business insights and really focus on sophistication so that you can, when the time comes that technology enables cross-channel, cross-screen, cross-format, dynamic creative optimization that is addressable to the customer that you're trying to speak to, that you're really, really focused on who that person is and how to talk to them. And so I think, to leave you guys with a couple of thoughts, it's really, really important to understand, your data, your partners, and your customers. Are you integrating data outside of your ad tech ecosystem into a broader cloud platform so that you can define your customer strategies? Or are you just looking at media KPIs, and are media KPIs your sole indicator of success? Do you have a clearly defined publisher strategy that allows you to incorporate different types of formats, different types of audiences, and really, really bring your data to the party so that you're able to drive overall media effectiveness? And ultimately, your customers. What do you know about your customers when deciding what message to show them? I'd say the promise of marketing really is the ability to show a customer the right message with the right format at the right time. And if you're not doing that in a way that is relevant to them, I would say that it's going to be very difficult for you to become a sophisticated marketer. That being said, if you're able to answer all these questions, and if you're able to start thinking about strategies that will set you up for success in the long term, and you can answer questions about your data, your partner, and your customers, I would say you can get a little bit more in-depth than the 3 here. But use these as starting points. Figure out where you can start to incorporate things, not just in your ad tech ecosystem, but your MarTech ecosystem, and really, really focus on what's going to drive the needle for your business, because it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all for everybody. And with that, we thank you. I know we have about 20 minutes for Q&A here. If there's anything that you guys would like to go through, we're more than happy to answer any and all questions.
Chris, Adam, fantastic job, and thank you so much. Truly insightful details. Just open the last poll here just to get some more details on how customers might be leveraging your cloud, or if you're an Analytics 360 customer, if you're currently using the BigQuery integration. So we'd love to get your responses there. We did take a couple of questions here around first-party data. I want to go ahead and share those with you here. So can MightyHive provide some specific examples of first-party data types that you've helped clients leverage to be more effective in their marketing?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say probably one of my favorite questions to answer because oftentimes people think about first-party data just from a media perspective. Right now, we're working with a global CPG company to understand the effectiveness of their media on point-of-sale transaction data in big box retailers. So we're working with the Targets and the Walmarts of the world to really, really understand on an individual level, if possible. We can join the information that we're collecting about our consumers from our website and then marry that in a clean room like Ads Data Hub so that we're able to really drive home the effectiveness of our media and focus on how that media dollar actually ended up influencing a downstream sale.
Awesome. Another question that we...
Hold on. I'm sorry, Doug. Do you want to go a little bit into what a data room is?
Yeah. Would it be helpful to go into what Ads Data Hub essentially accomplishes?
I'm going to have you answer that in just 1 second. The follow-on question here is, can you offer any sophisticated marketer strategies for any organizations that might not have readily available first-party data? What would you recommend that they do to increase their sophistication if that's a challenge for them?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. And I think that the example that I just gave is a pointed example of a company that is relatively data poor. And when you have a data poor ecosystem, it's important to focus on the things that you do have, right? So you do have media data. You do have individual IDs that are attached to that individual impression or that individual conversion. My recommendation for data poor companies, for lack of a better word, is to focus on figuring out places within your marketing or advertising ecosystems where you can actually start to collect that data. So I would say, an analytics platform is a really, really good first step. Defining what a path to purchase looks like. If you are, a CPG company that relies heavily on retail partnerships, figure out which one of those retail partnerships are looking to get more advanced in the way that they're thinking about their media strategies, right? If you're doing co-ops with retailers, if you're giving money to retailers to basically advertise on your behalf, make sure that you're getting something in return as well. I see more often than not, we have clients that say, we give a couple $1 million a year to the big box retailers just because, they have a huge footprint and they're able to spend and advertise on our behalf. And I say, well, that's great. But what's that at the expense of? You're not actually able to measure the effectiveness of those media dollars because you're not able to measure whether or not that person ultimately came back to your site or purchased that product. They'll know that. You might not. And so I would say that, co-ops and focusing on retail partnerships is important because it's definitely an important, channel for them. But at the end of the day, if you're doing that, you're really giving away your data, and I don't recommend it.
Yeah, and Chris, you and I have been saying all week, if you don't have a data strategy, then you don't really have a digital marketing strategy. So I think what you're saying is so key here is that choose the thing that is going to yield data coming back to you again. So whether that's clean rooms or data, whether it's lookalike modeling, all driving people back to your world again, where you have the landing pages to capture. It's all about building up your first-party data so that engine gets stronger and stronger and then ultimately makes your digital marketing better.
And I would say that there's a high level of change management that often needs to go into things like this. If you're selling in brick and mortar locations, you might have to change your way of working so that your store employees can actually start to collect that information on your behalf, so that you're able to do analysis on the customers that are buying from you, when they're actually in your store versus buying via e-commerce. So it's really figuring out, just to put a fine point on that, figuring out what you have available to you, and then expanding from there.
Outstanding, Chris. Outstanding, Adam. We're going to go ahead and just take a couple minutes here to have you give a real high-level overview of ADH, Ads Data Hub, and if you could possibly provide maybe one or two use cases that you're familiar with that customers could potentially benefit from leveraging that tool.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that I think of Ads Data Hub is essentially as a clean room. So it allows you to bring in multiple data sources and do analysis on an individual level that you wouldn't usually be able to do if you were just using like log level files across the different ecosystems that you guys are, or platforms or technologies that you're buying off of. Ads Data Hub essentially is a way for marketers to start to break down some of the walls that the walled gardens have put up and do analysis on their customers, build path to purchase models, really focus on the integration of not just media data, but maybe sales data, and build directional models between, a dollar that I spent in programmatic, or a dollar that I spent in search, or a dollar that I spent on YouTube, for example, and then tie those IDs back to, a customer database, right? I can start to build audiences based on likelihood to purchase, right? I can start to build audiences based on, a customer lifetime value. I can start to build custom attribution models where if I have, to use the hotel example as well, if I've got, an offline conversion from a third-party source like, an Expedia or another OTA, how can I aggregate all that data in one place so that I can build audiences on those people to really drive home media effectiveness in the future? So those are just like a number of examples of how you would activate within Ads Data Hub. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's really focusing on how is your data talking to one another across the different technologies that you guys are using, and how can I integrate those things so that I can do user level analysis or audience level analysis. And then I think the promise of Ads Data Hub long term is the ability to export those things and really focus on activation within the different platforms within GMP.
I heard someone say the other day that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time to plant a tree is today. And that's exactly the same thing that's at work here, is that your data plan, first of all, don't forget that you actually probably have a lot of data from 20 years ago. So you have to think about, from all aspects of your company, all sources, whether it's accounting or CRM, wherever it is, think about where you might already have data. But the more important thing is that if you feel behind the ball, you're not. There's a lot of companies that are in the same kind of situation. At MightyHive, we help these kinds of companies every single day. And think about how you can start today, because these tools are available to you. And a data clean room is a great example of it, and there are others to help you really strengthen that muscle and build up your first-party data now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you so much, attendees. A couple last thoughts here from Google. We'll be providing a follow-up email with some more details for you. We'd love to engage with you on any of the questions posed or any of the responses provided. We'd love to get you connected to MightyHive if you have more questions and would like to dig deeper into any of the topics discussed, as well as getting you connected to your Google account teams. Or you are welcome to reach out to Stephen and myself. We would love to talk to you about any of the topics as well. Thank you for taking the time. Be on the lookout for future workshops, which are coming here, as well as our upcoming bulletin for next month. Have a great day, and we'll see you again soon.